And thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. Happy Friday. We here on this show are having a big news night tonight that we have been prepping for the past 2 days. We have for our special guest tonight former CIA Director John Brennan. Director Brennan is the first in what the president has threatened will be a long line of current and former senior law enforcement and intelligence officials whose security clearances the president plans to revoke. Almost all of the officials he's put on his list thus far are, perhaps coincidentally, people who might be in a position to conceivably testify about what they observed during the Russian attack on the 2016 election, including potentially ties to Trump campaign officials and reaction to the investigation from inside the Trump transition, the Trump White House, and from the president himself. After the president yanked the former CIA director's security clearance, the president told the Wall Street Journal, bluntly, in a sort of impromptu interview, according to the Journal, that the reason he went after the CIA director in that way, the reason he revoked those security clearances, is specifically because of the Russia investigation. The president drew a direct link, telling the Journal, quote, "I call it the rigged witch hunt. It is a sham, and these people led it." No president is ever known to have ever personally intervened to revoke the security clearance of any official or former official, let alone for the reason this president explained in this case. When you're on uncharted territory, you don't always know what will come next for us as a country, but when you're the person in the middle of uncharted attacks like this, you have to wonder what it feels like. This interview tonight with John Brennan will be his first live TV interview since the president took this action. Director Brennan, thank you very much for being here tonight, sir. I know you have choices about where to be. Thanks for being here.
No, thanks, Rachel, for having me on.
You were CIA director from 2013 to January of 2017.
Right.
You were President Obama's counterterrorism and homeland security advisor. You were 25 years as a CIA officer. Before that, you have been through some stressful situations in your life. How has it been these past couple of days since the president singled you out for attack and punishment in this way?
It's fine. As far as I'm concerned personally, I'm fine. It's not unexpected. He had signaled that something like this was going to happen. Nobody, though, got in touch with me from the White House or CIA since it was first noted that my security clearance was under review. I learned about it when somebody called me to say that Sarah Huckabee Sanders was announcing at the podium that those clearances were revoked. Again, I was not shocked for a couple reasons. One, there was a heads up. But secondly, I'm not shocked, quite frankly, at all the appalling things that Mr. Trump has done. And so I think this is an egregious act that flies in the face of traditional practice, as well as common sense, as well as national security. And I think that's why there's been such a outcry from many intelligence professionals, not to support me, but to support the principle that security clearances are something that's very, very solemn and sacred, and they never, ever should be used for political purposes, either to grant friends those clearances or to revoke clearances of your critics.
And with 3 decades experience at the CIA and all of your other government service, clearly you're familiar with clearances, with the processes and procedures around clearances, including the processes that exist inside the government for revoking them for cause. Mm-hmm. When the president first signaled that he might go after your security clearance, did you expect that the CIA would then be put through its paces in terms of the normal procedures for how these things go, that they would write a memo, they would evaluate whether you had behaved in any way that would justify this action? Did you expect that it would go through channels?
Well, if these were normal times, I would have expected it. But these are not normal times. These are, quite frankly, very frightening times. So I didn't expect any adherence to process, any adherence to the steps and the measures and the regulations that exist by executive order. I think Mr. Trump has demonstrated time and time again that he believes that just because he has the authority to do these things, that he has, in fact, the right to do it irrespective of what is truly the appropriate thing to do.
And appropriate is a general word there. Congressman Elijah Cummings has suggested, and other observers have suggested that even though the president does have the right to sort of handle security clearances as commander-in-chief, there are executive orders that supposedly guide the way these things are handled. Congressman Cummings has suggested overtly that it may be illegal, what the president has done. Congressman Schiff, who's the top Democrat on Intel, has suggested the same thing. Are you considering legal action, or do you think you have a legal right to exert against the president's actions here?
Well, I think, as you can imagine, a number of lawyers have reached out to say that there is a very strong case here, not so much to reclaim mine, but to prevent this from happening in the future. Mm-hmm. And so I am thinking about what it is that I might want to do at this time. I'm trying to make sure that the principle is what is going to be defended and supported. And this is something that should not be repeated. The other people on the so-called enemies list now, I think this is just another example of Mr. Trump trying to frighten and intimidate others. But I can tell you, having worked in the national security and intelligence community for many, many years, these are not the type of people who are going to be bullied or intimidated by someone of the likes of Mr. Trump.
There is a list. They are former senior, one currently serving Justice Department official. Yeah. And there's actually some news about him tonight that I want to get your reaction to. It's just broken within the last hour or so. But among this list, you appear to be first. The president is threatening to revoke everybody else's security clearances. He acted against you. Do you have a sense of why the president thinks you're so special? why he's started with you? I don't know. I guess I don't know if I'm asking about something personal. I guess the way that I imagine this might go is that there might be something that you know, or that he knows that you know, that might be making him particularly angry or particularly nervous. I
don't know what it is that's motivating Mr. Trump to focus on me at first. I met Mr. Trump only once at Trump Tower in early January 2017 when we briefed him on the intelligence community assessment on Russian interference in the election. That's the only interaction I've had with him ever. Now, I have been outspoken, and I'm sure that my outspokenness and some of the things that I have said have, irritated him. I wish I didn't have to say these things. And it's one thing to have policy differences or substantive differences with presidents, and I've had them in the past with previous presidents. Mm-hmm. What really gets under my skin is Mr. Trump's lack of decency, integrity, honesty, and his lack of commitment to this country's well-being and national security. Mr. Trump is motivated by whatever is in the best interest of Mr. Trump. That has been his modus operandi for many decades. I was hoping that he was going to change once he assumed the solemn responsibilities of the office of the presidency. That's why for my first year, I sometimes spoke out when he was in front of the agency's memorial wall and spoke about the size of his inauguration crowd. But I did it very, very selectively. I gave him a year. I said, maybe he is going to adapt and change. But it seemed like day after day, week after week, month after month, things just got worse. And he did not live up to, I think, what Americans expect of the President of the United States. To speak with great forcefulness, but to do it with integrity and honesty. And Mr. Trump, time after time, I think, has really just disappointed millions of Americans, which I'm trying to give voice to. And so I know a lot of people think that a former intelligence official shouldn't be doing this. I don't consider what I'm doing political at all. I've never registered as a Republican or a Democrat, through my entire life. But I feel such a commitment to this country's security and its reputation. I'm the son of an immigrant, and my father taught me and my siblings early on just how important it is that we take as very special the privilege of being born an American citizen. And so when I see what Mr. Trump is doing, basically trashing the reputation of this country worldwide, and the way he has treated Americans, fellow Americans, how he refers to them, the divisiveness, the incitement, the fueling of hatred and polarization. This is not what this country's about.
Presidents over the centuries, over the generations, some of them have been terrible jerks, if you read the right history books. Some of them have been deliberately divisive. Some of them have had terrible ideas or treated people in their personal lives or even in political life in egregious ways. Your criticism of President Trump rises above that type. Despite what you just articulated here, you've gone further than that. After Helsinki, you were stark and even a little bit scary in your criticism of his behavior. You said it rose to treason.
I said it was nothing short of treasonous.
In this current controversy, that specific comment has been singled out by a number of people as a comment that maybe by you crossed the line. That was maybe
Cross what line?
Well, was it
freedom of speech?
No, I'm not saying that you don't have a right to say it. But do you stand by that consideration? And can you explain, can you elaborate what you mean by treasonous? It's a very serious allegation.
I know what the Russians did in interfering in the election. I'm at 100% confidence in what they did. And for Mr. Trump to stand on that stage in Helsinki with all the world's eyes upon him and to basically said he doesn't understand why would the Russians interfere in the election. He's given Mr. Putin and the Russians a pass time after time after time. And he keeps referring to this whole investigation as a witch hunt, as, bogus, as, And to me, this was an attack against the foundational principle of our great republic, which is the right of all Americans to choose their elected leaders. And for Mr. Trump to so cavalierly just dismiss that, yes, sometimes my Irish comes out, and in my tweets, and I did say that it rises to and exceeds the level of high crimes and misdemeanors and is nothing short of treasonous, because he had the opportunity there to be able to say to the world that this is something that happened. It should never, ever happen again. And if Russia tries at all to do it, they're going to pay serious price for it. I don't expect Mr. Putin to acknowledge it. He's going to deny. But for the President of the United States to continue to prevaricate on this issue, I think does a great injustice and a disservice to the men and women of the intelligence law enforcement community, and does a great disservice to the citizens of the United States. And that's why I said it was nothing short of treasonous. I didn't mean that he committed treason, but it was a term that I used, nothing short of treasonous.
Well, you didn't mean that he committed treason, though.
I said it's nothing short of treasonous. That was the term that I used, yeah.
If we diagram the sentence, nothing short of treasonous means it's treason. I mean, the reason I'm bringing this out is because when you say, I know what the Russians did, and when knowing what the Russians did, observing the president's behavior, you go to the word treason, it suggests that you think the president may be serving a foreign country rather than our own.
Well, yeah. I think he has crossed the line repeatedly in terms of his failure to fulfill the responsibility of the office and to look Vladimir Putin square in the eye and say, this should never, ever happen again.
Do you think that he is knowingly serving the interests of the Russian government instead of the U.S. government?
I scratch my head a lot. I'm puzzled over why Mr. Trump acts this way with such obsequiousness to Mr. Putin. I don't know. And I'm not going to try to pretend that I know. But there is something that is very disconcerting, very worrisome about how an individual who occupies the Oval Office interacts with Mr. Putin. And I'm a great advocate of improving relations between Moscow and Washington. Don't get me wrong. I was a strong supporter of that during the Obama administration. And I stuck my neck out a number of times, particularly on Syria, to say, no, we need to be able to work with the Russians to be able to bring this mass carnage to a halt. But time after time, the Russians, would feign sincerity better than anybody I've ever known. But I do believe we need to get this behind us. I don't want this to, roil the waters forever. But we need to have a president who's going to acknowledge this and make sure that he is able to then move on.
How do we get this behind us? I mean, you're suggesting that there's things that we do not yet know that have not yet been adjudicated or laid fairly before the American people about the president and his connection to what happened with Russia. Do we need to know that in order to move on, or should we decide to move on before we know? It's
called the Mueller investigation. It's called the duly appointed special counsel who was given the mandate to investigate what Russia did in terms of interference in our presidential election, and who might have been working in support of Russian objectives, and who might have committed a crime in that process. And so that's why Robert Mueller is a real national treasure. He needs to be able to continue with this investigation unimpeded.
Mueller's indictment about the GRU, about Russian military intelligence, lays out in black and white, in great detail, an alleged criminal conspiracy to illegally sway the U.S. election. It's named conspirators. It describes what they did. There was an agreement among multiple actors to pursue an aim, and then they took actions in pursuit of that aim. So they've defined a criminal conspiracy existing in the world.
On the part of a foreign government, which you need.
Yes.
Foreign government, yes, absolutely.
But because that conspiracy has been defined, what would an American have to do to be considered part of that conspiracy? Right? If you've got a foreign conspiracy orchestrated by a foreign government, what does it mean to have an American abettor? What does it mean for an American? I mean, the word collusion has become, refrigerator poetry.
Yes,
and these
exactly.
It's just used by anybody for any reason,
Right.
and oftentimes incoherently. But what would amount, in your minds, in intelligence terms, to an American being a part of that conspiracy, the one that's been defined by Robert Mueller already?
Yeah, and I will leave it to the lawyers and to courts to decide whether or not something is criminal or not. But in my mind, it requires someone to knowingly support the efforts of a foreign government to interfere in U.S. domestic politics, and especially in election. And so any American who was working with the Russians or working with intermediaries who were working with the Russians, and those Americans who knowingly tried to collude, conspire, and to work with them in order to advance their political objectives here in the States, I think that rises to the level of conspiracy. Now, a lot depends on what Robert Mueller has been able to uncover. Maybe there's none of that. And in my op-ed in the New York Times, when I said that Mr. Trump's claims of no collusion are hogwash, is because there is collusion, I think, in open sight now because of so many things I've learned since I left office, because of what has appeared in the press. The Trump Tower meeting with Don Jr. and others. And I also, when I was CIA director, I didn't know that it was the day that Mr. Trump basically gave a public call to the Russians to find Hillary Clinton's emails, that in fact it was that same day that the GRU was actively looking for it. So there is collusion in plain sight, but I don't know whether or not any of that rises to the level of conspiracy, and whether any of that conspiracy rises to the level of criminal liability for that conspiracy.
You described in detail before Congress an open setting congressional testimony last spring that in the summer of 2016, you at CIA were alarmed by, you said your radar went up about the number of contacts between Russian officials and U.S. persons at a time that Russia was mounting this interference campaign. When you say that your radar went up about that, did your radar go up about that just because it appeared that Russian operation had as a component of that operation the engagement of Americans toward that end? Or was it specifically because of the people, the Americans, the specific U.S. citizens who those Russians were targeting? What was it that put your alarm up?
Well, first, I knew that it was a very intense Russian effort to interfere in the election, number one. Number two, I am well aware and have a lot of experience in observing what the Russians will do to try to suborn American citizens, to get American citizens to work for them. And this was a very intensive effort. And so, as I said in my op-ed, myself and Jim Comey and Mike Rogers from NSA, we talked about the importance of making sure that our radar, our collection radar, was up so that we had early indications or be able to uncover any effort on the part of the Russians to work with American citizens. But the American citizens were reaching out to the Russians as well to see what they could get, see if they could get any dirt on Hillary Clinton. So my radar was going because I knew the Russians were engaged in this effort, and I was aware of contacts with American citizens that may have been totally innocent on the American citizens' part, and maybe they weren't abetting at all.
Was it clear to you that those contacts with American citizens were part of the operation, that it was part of the way that Russia was trying to accomplish its objectives?
I was very concerned and aware that the Russians were trying to leverage U.S. citizens in order to achieve their objectives in the presidential election.
While you were in office as CIA director before you left on Inauguration Day, did you conclude that U.S. persons were successfully leveraged in that effort?
No. And that's why I said in open testimony that I was concerned about these contacts because people will go down a treasonous path, sometimes very unknowingly, and they get into very hot water and deep water, and then they, in fact, cannot extricate themselves because the Russians are very clever at getting people in positions of potential compromising positions that they then cannot sort of turn back. So when I left office on January 20th of 2017, I had unresolved questions in my mind about whether or not any of those U.S. persons were working in support of the Russian efforts.
And those were referred, those concerns about specific U.S. persons referred to the FBI.
Right. We call it incidental collection in terms of CIA's foreign intelligence collection authorities. Anytime we would incidentally collect information on a U.S. person, we would hand that over to the FBI because they have the legal authorities to do it. We would not pursue that type of investigative, sort of leads. We would give it to the FBI. So we were picking things up that was of great relevance to the FBI, but we want to make sure that they were there so they could piece it together with whatever they were collecting domestically here. Again,
so it was an intelligence sharing operation between.
Right. We put together a fusion center at CIA that brought NSA and FBI officers together with CIA to make sure that those proverbial dots would be connected.
Let me ask you about one other thing that happened during your tenure as CIA director, and I don't believe you've ever been asked about this before. Several weeks before the election in 2016, the early fall of 2016, I know personally that two well-respected reporters here at NBC approached you and asked you about a story that they were chasing concerning then candidate Donald Trump and connections he might have to Russia and the Kremlin. You were approached by these reporters. They were asking for either on the record or off the record guidance from you on that story, and they say you told them, I don't think I can help you with that. I don't think I can help you with this. I can't confirm it. I don't have that for you. I can't help you. So you wouldn't confirm any of it. You offered no help. This was September of 2016. It sounds like at that time you actually did know quite a lot about the Russian operation to influence the election and potential connections to the Trump campaign. The press was coming to you with these queries. I know they at least were coming to you from these queries from within this building. What was that of interest to you that the press seemed to be onto some of this? And how did you handle that press interest?
Yes. Well, I don't think I've ever been asked this question on a news show. But in fact, I informed the Senate Intelligence Committee about this in my closed testimony over the past year and a half. Yes, it was in September. And two journalists, noteworthy members of the media, asked me if I had heard about a document or a report about that contained some salacious information related to Donald Trump.
Were they specifically asking about the alleged sex tape or?
They were talking about that, and they used some of those descriptors. Didn't go into great detail, but they led me to believe that it was related to some things that might have happened in Moscow. I didn't confirm or deny anything for various reasons. One is that I don't talk to American journalists about U.S. persons, ever. Number two, much less talk about a U.S. presidential candidate to journalists. And it was later that year when, in December, was the first time I had ever put eyes on the so-called Steele dossier. That I recalled the conversation I had with those two members of the media and said, oh, this must be what they're talking about, because they said this was widely circulating among the media and the press, this document, this report, these rumors, or whatever else. And I basically told them, I can't help you with that, and I'm not going to engage. But it was subsequent to that that I connected the dots then and said they must have been talking about what ultimately was referred to as the Steele dossier. Again, I didn't see that dossier until December. There are a lot of people out there, including members of Congress, who claim that I told Senate Minority Leader at the time, Harry Reid, about it in August or September. That is false. I did not have eyes or information on that
until
dossier
after the election?
Until after the election, that's right.
Before it was published in January, but after the election in November.
Right. It became a hot topic of debate within CIA, NSA, and FBI and DNI about whether or not to take that dossier into account when the intelligence community assessment was done. We decided no, because there's no way we could substantiate it. It wasn't an intelligence document. So it was appended to it, but it was not taken into account at all as that intelligence community assessment was done and was completed.
The president has made a specific on-the-record allegation against you on that specific topic. There's also a little bit of breaking news about the security clearance fallout after the president revoked your security clearance this week. Please stick with us. Former CIA Director John Brennan is my guest. We'll be right back.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.